Welcome to Poland Daily History with me, Nicholas Richardson. In the previous episodes, we have discussed the steps the Polish government in exile in London took to protect Polish Jews from the German attempt to exterminate all Jews living in territories controlled by the German Third Reich. We have now reached the point of our discussion where we will look more closely at why the Western Allies didn't try to stop the Holocaust by bombing the railway tracks leading to the concentration and extermination camps of Auschwitz-Birkenau. We will also look more closely at how Witold Pilecki, the Auschwitz volunteer, managed to infiltrate the camp as an inmate.
The Western Allies, they didn't see a feasibility in really doing anything on the ground in Poland, whether by bombing or by sending some kind of delegation. Of course, there were those that say that maybe they could have bribed the Germans. And the Germans, especially during the end of the war, they did send a lot of signals that we might be willing to negotiate the release of Jewish prisoners in exchange for various concessions, whether financial or tactical military on the front line. For example, the front line wouldn't move at a certain section for a couple of months while the Germans could focus on fighting the Russians instead. But no such deals were made. There is also the principle of never negotiate with a terrorist. So there were many contemplations that had to be made. But as you say, many people also simply couldn't fathom that this could be true. Polish claims that the Holocaust was taking place were often dismissed as Polish propaganda, that
yes.
The Poles were desperate to get more funding for their own cause, more help for their cause. And because of that, they exaggerated the conditions on the ground in Poland, both for ethnic Poles, but they also knew that there was a large Jewish population in America, and if they wanted to reach American politics, then maybe they could have played the Jewish card, so to say. For example, U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when he met with Jan Kalski, one of the couriers of the Polish underground who had been sent into the Warsaw Ghetto to observe the realities and then report about it in the West, when he met with Roosevelt, and in the middle of giving this account of the Holocaust in Poland and the conditions in the ghetto, Roosevelt interrupted him to ask about the conditions of horses in Poland. So some of the Poles were puzzled, to say the least, by the attitude of many Western leaders. And again, Żegota, the organization which had been created to aid Jews in Poland during the Holocaust by the Polish government in exile, one of its major problems was funds. So even if you couldn't have bombed Auschwitz, maybe it would have been a good idea to at least send some money over to finance the activities of the Żegota organization, but that didn't happen either. So there are definitely many grievances that could be held against the policies that were put in place by some of the Allied leaders during the war. But going back to the attempts of the Polish government in exile, as you mentioned, Pilecki himself, he had agreed to being captured in a so-called łapanka, basically a street roundup, where the Germans, they would close off the ends of two streets, and they would just comb through the entire civilian population that by pure accident was on site at the moment. They would look for people that were that they had arrest warrants out for, or that they were searching for anyhow, but often they would simply take these people and use them as hostages, that in case, for example, the Polish military underground killed a German, then 100 people of these random hostages would be executed. And many of these people would be sent to Auschwitz. So Pilecki found out that such a roundup would take place at a certain street at a certain time, and he walked there knowingly that he would probably be sent to Auschwitz, which was his exact idea. So later he escaped from the camp, and he managed to write a report that reached the West. At the end of the war, he traveled to Italy, where he wrote down his book and gave even more information about it. However, he never traveled to the U.S., unlike Jan Karski, that was the courier that had entered the Warsaw Ghetto to witness it all with his own eyes. So these were the voices that the Polish government in exile, or the Polish underground state, had specifically tasked with getting the word out. Unfortunately, as we have seen, it didn't really work well. So probably the work that was done organically on the ground with people such as Irena Sendler, that managed to smuggle out so many children from the ghetto, was more beneficial in the long run. But you also had Poles working outside of Poland, trying to help Jews. The most famous example probably is the so-called Ładoś group, which was a group of Polish diplomats working in Switzerland, in Bern. And they, together with some Jewish activists, managed to falsify thousands of Latin American passports.
Yes, because I think it's another point which, when we talk about the passports, of course, the Germans put a lot of pressure on the Swiss to close down the Polish embassy in Bern, but the Swiss resisted that. But the point was that Poland, essentially having ceased to exist as a state at that time, they couldn't issue anybody with Polish passports.
Yes.
So they had to actually have cooperation from other countries, which again is... I just find when you take all this into account, at every stage there's a problem.
Yes.
And yet still folk don't give up. They still find a way around it, despite everything else that's going on. I mean, that is that spirit, that determination is just remarkable.
Absolutely. So these Latin American passports were then smuggled into occupied Europe, and many to Poland, but especially other countries in occupied Europe, where these people would be able to claim that I am a Paraguayan citizen, or Colombian citizen, or Argentinian citizen, and I want to leave Europe, and the Germans had to allow them to leave.
Adam, I'm going to have to stop you there in mid-sentence, albeit. I'm stopping Adam again because the clock has defeated us. But do join us again on Poland Daily History. We'll hear more about what Adam has to say on this fascinating subject, the underground effort to save Jews during the Second World War in Poland.